Okay, thank you very much, and I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ross. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, she said that I was going to share all my knowledge, so thank you very much for coming. Have a good one. That's all I got.
I could have done that.
You know more than I do, so we're going longer. All right. So yeah, I don't have any slides. I thought I'd do it without slides. And we'll do a lot of questions. I'm used to speaking about particular agents, so we'll do some of the ones that are new and emerging. I'm going to give you some ideas from research. I think that's how it was touted, as new ideas in research that are coming down the pipe now. So, all right. So just some things that some people have heard me speak of even this week, but I just want to mention that attention, which is one of the cognitive functions, can actually impact gait. So if there's a cognitive deficit of in that attentional realm, then it can affect how you walk. So when you're talking to your doc, you might just, and there's research that's shown that and proven it. It's not just in MS, by the way, Parkinson's too. That might be a reason to take a medicine that's just going to help mediate the attentional capacity. Attention also, you need to have good attention to memorize things. So when somebody tests your memory, or when you complain of memory disorders, if you're not able to pay attention well, that may be part of the problem with the memory. So I like to kind of see things globally as well as to parse things out. That's a good one to parse out. You have to figure out, okay, am I not remembering stuff just because I'm foggy and I wasn't able to put it in the tape recorder in the first place because I wasn't able to focus on it? And sometimes the medicines that we're taking can, you probably have to lower your shot because I'm short, the podium's going to, like, it's up to my shoulders. You know, the medicines you're taking can impact on the drugs. The drugs you're taking can impact on your attention. So another one is sleep. They have found a lot of patients with MS, a huge number, have sleep disorders. And a lot of people have heard me speaking recently, but for the newbies, if you ask yourself, or you get your doctor to ask you the question, do I feel refreshed in the morning? And if the answer is no, then it's a highly possible thing that you have a sleep disorder. And if you have a sleep disorder, that's going to affect your attention too, because you're going to be fatigued or tired, as well as contributing to the whole lassitude of MS. So addressing the sleep disorder as a specific extra problem is a good idea too. So just some things, this is recent research in the last year that has to do with what people have as symptoms as opposed to the new drugs and the mechanisms of action and all, which will no doubt bore you completely. But what I'll do is try to whet your appetite so that when you go online and you Google alenduzumab or something like that, or you want to see, okay, I remember you talked about that a little bit. It went in one ear, went out the other, but I want to learn more about that because Dr. So-and-so mentioned I might be a candidate for that. At least it'll be somewhat familiar, and you'll have some kind of a structure in your brain you can hang the information that you're reading about on. I'm not going to be able to teach you everything. I can't teach you all how DNA works and how the whole immune system works today. So that won't work. I don't even know. But I'll give you the things that I do know that would help you read about it and make some decisions. Because the new medicines, the next 5 years, the whole spectrum of MS decision-making as to what meds a patient's going to take or a doctor's going to prescribe has changed. You've all heard about the changing landscape in MS. And these emerging therapies, there's hundreds coming down the pipe now. I mean, there's so much research going on in this disease, and there's phase 2 trials that are just getting done, and they're into phase 3 trials on new drugs, and it's going to go from, oh, a piece of cake, I just prescribed Copaxone or Rebif or Baserin, and I'm all done. I don't have to worry. That one didn't work. I choose one of the other 3. Those days are long gone now. There's going to be all kinds of combinations of therapy. There's going to be, do I go from this first-line drug to a second-line drug? Is this one more appropriate as my first-line drug, and why? And you, as the informed consumer, because it's your body, it's going to behoove you to get some of this information under your belt before you start putting these pills in your mouth or these injections in your skin. So I'll try to help you with that this morning just a little bit, just to give you some frameworks and some specifics so that you'll say, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that guy that sort of looks like, what did I say I look like? Richard Dreyfuss. The little short guy looks like Richard Dreyfuss. He told me about that new medicine that's coming down the pipe. But before we do medicines, I wanted to talk about MRI, because there's new stuff happening in MRI too. Neuroimaging probably has made the single most important impact on how we're dealing with MS of anything in the last 10 years. How we understand it, how we understand its treatment. The whole McDonald criteria, you know, when I started back when the Flintstones were around, it was all based on clinical. And then we didn't have an MRI yet, believe it or not. Then the MRIs have come along, and we can actually make the diagnosis without spinal fluid in a lot of cases, just based on the MRI. There's whole criteria just from the MRIs. And there's new MRIs coming out that they're doing research on, you know, ways of doing the sequencing, strengths of magnets, et cetera, which are very elegant and are teaching us a lot about the disease, because it's a unique problem to have a disease inside a skull. You know, if somebody is a cardiologist or they're a liver doctor, some kidney doctor, they can access their organs of their patients and find out what's going on in the histology, the tissue, way more easily than we neurologists can access the tissue of the diseases that we're dealing with, right? Because God put the skull around the brain. For good reason, in a lot of cases. In my case, really good reasons. You have a lot of concussions. So you'll see that before the end of the lecture. So if there's a skull here, it's not easy to biopsy. It's not easy to get tissue and do a histopathologic analysis of this disease. And so there's constantly changing ideas about what MS is, what's going on at the cellular level. It changes almost weekly. And then some of these experts will come out with a commitment, okay, these are the 4 subtypes of MS. It's just these 4, we know it. And then the next week, the same doctor saying, nope, wrong, there's something else too. So I try to keep up with this stuff, and I'm going to try to share the latest, but it's a moving target, folks. So, you know, next year, if they have me back, which they probably won't, because, you know, I don't get asked back. Well, I'll have something different to say. And it's going to be because it's a changing landscape. But the MRI gives us an in vivo look that even histopathology doesn't. And that's the point I want to make, is that the MRI is teaching us about how this disease is behaving and what's going on inside the brains of MS patients that we can't get in the usual way of looking at cells under a microscope. However, there have been some recent studies just coming out where somebody has had a biopsy and you know, they know what the MS looked like at that point in time, and then the patient died for some other reason, and they had donated their body to science, and they were able to do a path on their brain. So in a couple of cases now, in the last year, they've been able to look at, okay, here's what the lesions looked like at the biopsy, and here's what they look like at path, say a year later or 6 months later, and compare. And you know what? They get new information, and it was different than they thought from the biopsy. So there's, bottom line, take-home point, most of the disease is inflammatory. Just like we used to say 20 years ago. It's inflammation causing demyelination. Everybody knows what that is, right? Inflammation, demyelination. Hands, if you've never heard the words inflammation and demyelination before, don't be embarrassed. It's okay. I'll explain it. Good. So we're all on the same page. That's most of the disease. But there's also stuff going on in the cortex where the brain cells are out here near the skull, or where the brain cells, gray matter, not white. White is the insulation, so that's the myelin. But there's also stuff going on in the brain cells, independent of the demyelination. Now, we do know this. If you have it, this is just sort of a model. Okay, this isn't exactly right. It's just something to get your head around, so to speak. You have a demyelinating plaque in the white matter, right? Inflammation. Here's the plaque. It's a circle. You know, our brain has millions and millions and millions of neurons. Those are the brain cells. Those are the guys that have the wires that have the insulation around them, right? The brain cells. Look up at the Milky Way, look at the stars in the Milky Way, and all those millions of stars, that's kind of like the millions of stars that you have in your brain. It's brain cells. But if you have a plaque, coming out of that plaque are, say, 10,000 radiating wires that now got transected by the plaque. When those transected wires, when that wire dies back to the neuron that it came from, that causes damage in those neurons. That's a lot of where the atrophy comes from. That's a lot of where the cognitive loss comes from. It's the secondary loss of the brain cells because of the primary inflammation of plaque. Everyone got that concept? Because it's really important. That's State of the art. Yes? Everyone got it? It's an easy image. Anyone not got it? Okay. So, that's not all there's going on though. It's not just brain atrophy secondary to the demyelination. There's also a neurodegenerative process, and 2 weeks ago I said there wasn't, but they've changed it again. There is a neurodegenerative process going on so that something is hitting the brain cells too. Brain cells themselves, not just the white matter, not just the inflammation. Nothing that's on the market right now, approved by the FDA, except for maybe rituximab, which the NIH is doing a study on, hits that part of the disease process. So some of these new emerging therapies will. So you could see why you could have a cocktail, something to hit the inflammation when that's going on, and something to hit that other part when that's going on. Now, they know this too. Secondary progressive, right? I'm not even looking at my notes. So I do know something. Secondary progressive is something different is happening. Right? You know when you're having relapsing remitting, you've got flare-ups. That's the relapse. And that kind of peters out a little bit. And yet, the disease continues to progress. The ataxia is getting a little bit worse, the memory is getting a little bit worse, maybe the leg weakness is a little bit worse, maybe the vision comes and goes a bit, not as bad as optic neuritis, but it's just kind of smoldering along in a downhill course. Secondary progressive. Nothing really approved for that yet. A lot of emerging therapies in trial to try to treat that, but it seems to be a different part of the disease process than that initial stuff with the flare-ups. Does everyone agree with that kind of feeling on it? Because that's where the experts are thinking. Do you guys all agree with that? Because that's where they're directing their energies. You don't agree? Okay. Who disagrees with that? And who has what they feel might be secondary progressive, and then they have some kind of insight into it? Do they think they're still having flare-ups that are just more subtle, or do you agree with what I just said?
I think there are subtle relapses.
Let's do it by hand, Sue. First.
Subtle relapses.
Still some relapses happening. I agree with that too. Yeah. But not as many as at the beginning. Okay, I agree, Max. Somebody else? Yeah?
Yeah, it's not for me, it's my wife, Joan.
Yeah,
She couldn't be here today. She's telling me that everything seems to be getting worse slowly, but steadily.
It's
Never
Inexorable.
feels good, and then, come back.
Yeah.
It's always getting worse and worse and worse.
Right. And there's nothing we have to treat that yet. There's nothing. And so the other effort is going to be made to heal that. Rather than, because a lot of that may be, remember that demyelinating plaque with the radiating axons coming out of it, transected and dying back in different directions to all of their origins? And it may be that it's just overwhelming as those things start dropping out in the circumference of the thing from that plaque, that's where the sort of progression feels like it's happening. So if we could patch that original spot where the original plaque was, and maybe arrest the transection and then kind of patch the dying back part, sort of a healing process, then that might be one way of attacking secondary progressive, rather than change the whole immune system. Don't let some T cells in, change them the regulator T cells, all that stuff that they do with the original early MS, change our thinking on it, and that's what's happening. So that she's right, and the experts recognize that. But they're going to try to change the way they're fixing it. Okay? So what can we do now? What can you take home today that you can do? Because they're going to give you these new medicines so you can read about them and understand them. But before I get to that, I want to get stuff that I get your attention better. Vitamin D, huge. Everyone's heard of vitamin D, right? It's like almost old history. Anybody who's not doing vitamin D, they're really off base, right? Vitamin D, everyone's, come on, hands up. Vitamin D, everyone knows about it. Guess what? Even more information continues to come out about vitamin D. Do you guys remember when I used to talk about Epstein-Barr virus? Yep. Remember, you know how I'm sort of a quack, and I go out there and I go, oh, Epstein-Barr virus has something to do with MS. I know it does. It really does. Guess what? Just come out. Epstein-Barr virus correlates with vitamin D. At the age when you contract the disease MS environmentally, which impacts on your genetics, whatever it is, and your susceptibility to the MS, say between 10 and 15 years of age, the vitamin D level at that age affects the Epstein-Barr virus level at that age. The Epstein-Barr virus then is what can ameliorate or can cause or not cause the MS. Point one. Point two, Epstein-Barr virus is affected by vitamin D and can influence flares. People who have high Epstein-Barr virus levels have low vitamin D levels, they have more flares. Proven, just coming out in Science magazine right now. Okay, so Epstein-Barr virus does have something to do with MS. Vitamin D does have something to do with helping MS. So how much vitamin D should you be taking? 3,000 international units a day. Period. Even if you don't have MS, you're caring for somebody with MS. You're living in Maine, take 3,000 international units a day. You'll feel happier. It'll help your immune system. Vitamin D is a misnomer. It helps genes. It helps the immune system. It helps B cells, which, remember we said there was something that we need for healing in that progressive part where you're getting the atrophy and the cognitive loss and the ataxia? Guess what? Vitamin D helps those cells to upregulate and to do their thing better. So it can help you heal the MS that you have. So it's reducing flares, reducing the risk of MS, reducing the cause of MS. Vitamin D is huge. God-given, needs sunlight though. We don't have enough sunlight in Maine. We have a public health problem. Our vitamin D levels are all in the teens. If you have MS, you want your vitamin D level up to 60 to 80. Something you can do. Emerging research, based on research that's been replicated now over and over and over again. This is not just, oh, feel good, alternative therapy, let's see what the Native American Indians did. No, this is true fact. Okay? Take it home, write it down. Vitamin D, yes. Now, yes.
Should you take the 3,000 all at once, or?
Yeah, because you're going to, otherwise you'll forget. Speaking of which, I'll get that hand in a second. Speaking of which, this is really cool. This is cool. This is grassroots Auburn research. Okay, so I was like really into vitamin D, and I'm like sick of the drug reps saying to me, "Yeah, what have you published? You don't know anything." So here's what we did. We took some people who had MS, 34 patients and 37 patients in another part of the study, and sent them to BASE. I have a cognitive neuroscience. Did all these, 7 hours of tests, and we did MRI, and we sent it to Dartmouth, and we used their software. And we found that vitamin D improves the volume of the corpus callosum in the posterior fifth, the splenium of the corpus callosum. That connects the two halves of the brain, right? Everyone knows that. Corpus callosum, everyone? Corpus callosum? Remember my favorite part of the brain? Corpus callosum? Who doesn't know what the corpus callosum is?
Me.
Cool. See, an honest guy. In between the two hemispheres of the brain, there's a track, a bridge that has just white matter at the axons going from the left hemisphere, analytical, very specific, very language-oriented, to the right hemisphere, very gestalt, holistic, touchy-feely, music, bad jokes. All those have to talk to each other, the two hemispheres, the two parts of your brain, and that's through the corpus callosum. That gets thinner in MS. The longer you have MS, the thinner it gets, because you've got dying back of those axons that are myelinated, primarily. Okay, so it's a sign of the atrophy. It's a sign of cognitive loss. You can preserve the volume of that. The actual anatomy is preserved by increasing your vitamin D. We proved it. It's statistically significant. Also, long-term memory was improved. Separate paper that we published, peer-reviewed journal, long-term memory was improved with vitamin D. So there's a function and an anatomy to it. So relapses reduced, memory improved, and actual brain structure improved. That's huge. That's huge. So vitamin D, take it home. It's new research and old research. There was a question over here.
Yeah, Epstein-Barr you're talking about, is chronic fatigue syndrome still considered a related?
It probably is, yeah, mono, a whole bunch of, and probably the fatigue. And, oh yeah, here's another thing, thanks for saying that. They treated some of these folks with antivirals, and they got better and their MS got better, by the way. By the way, that's just one paper, small numbers, so that's not like a huge thing, don't by writing that one down, but I can show you the paper afterwards. So there is something to that too. Yes?
Do you have any opinion on whether there's any potential regeneration of the corpus callosum based on vitamin D?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We didn't do it longitudinally like an MRI before and after to compare whether the corpus callosum, the question is, did it regenerate? Whether it got bigger or whether it just preserved it. I would guess from the time frame that we did the study, it was more of preservation rather than healing. I don't know yet. But there's 3 studies out there right now looking at vitamin D and actually repair of the brain. So we'll see. The jury's out. A very good question. That's like Nobel Prize level. Yeah.
The vitamin D, I don't have MS, but my doctor's got me on 50,000 units every other week. How does that relate to 3,000 units a day?
Excellent question. So he said that he's on 50,000 every other week. If you're really low, and you try the 3,000, 4,000 a day, and it doesn't get your level up, and that's what I would do first, is check it a few months later and see if the levels come up just with an oral. Please turn your cell phones off. If that doesn't work, then do this 50,000, and the 50,000 is not going to make you toxic. You can take a lot of vitamin D and not get toxic. They've shown that. You can take a huge amount of it. There was one patient, their PCP prescribed this 50,000, what is it, every week you get it, or every 2 weeks?
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. And somebody made a mistake, and they were taking 50,000 a day. This is a patient of mine, but I didn't order it, I just sort of picked them up 5 months later. I was like, whoa. And absolutely no side effects for that person. And I mean, you could conceivably get some, calcium disorder as a result of that, but they didn't. Your body can tolerate a lot of vitamin D. Go out in the sun, not today, but like say you're down in Florida or Georgia or Virginia or something, and you get 10 minutes of sun without your SPF 50 on. 10 minutes of sun, that's enough for your daily amount that you'll need. And then put on your sunscreen so you don't get skin cancer. But there is an increasing amount of MS down south now, and they think possibly one of the reasons is everyone's using SPF 50. People are not getting the sun exposure that they used to get because of the whole greenhouse effect and, anyway, holes in the ozone. So, present and emerging therapies for MS. So the 1990s brought the first treatments we know, the standard ABC drugs. Everyone know those? The usual, yeah, everyone knows those. Put in a plug, beta-serotonin, Rebif, Copaxone, okay, thanks, Avonex. So what are the new ones? What are the new ones? Who's heard of dimethyl fumarate? It was called BG12, now it's been called Tecfidera. Who's heard of it? Who's curious about it? Good. All right, one curious? Two curious? So it's a twice-a-day dosing. It's got a short half-life. It's an oral. There's a lot of experience in Europe with it, with psoriasis and with some related autoimmune diseases. Side effects include GI, so people are suggesting that you take the pill with food. In fact, the pill is related to another pill that's been used much more in Europe, but they wrapped it in something so that there wouldn't be the GI side effects as much. Still, people get them. It lasts. They can continue to last, but taking the pill with food seems to help a lot of people. And not everyone gets the GI side effects, but when they get them, it can be, in some people, really annoying. And the other one's flushing. Is another side effect that seems to have emerged. Some promise for the treatment of MS. There may even be something with the B cell component there. Now I mentioned the B cells. The T cells are the guys that go in and cause the demyelination, and we also know that the B cells can secrete immunoglobulins which cause other things, perhaps related to atrophy, perhaps related to fatigue. There's not much on the market to treat that, so there is some thinking that maybe this is just sort of not FDA package insert stuff, that the Tecfidera may be beneficial in the B cell arm of that disease we were talking about. So it's one of the oral agents that's now out there, gotten a lot of publicity, a lot of people are on it. So let's, interferon beta, everyone knows about that, glutamate acetate, everyone knows about that. How about teriflunomide? Who knows what that is? Who's heard of it before? That's it's got a, am I allowed to say brand names? Aubagio, I think is the brand name. It's derived from leflunomide, which has sort of a bad rep. It led to this drug getting a couple black box warnings in the FDA warning thing. Let me just look at my phone here because it's buzzing just to make sure my kids are alive. Sorry. Be an interesting morning. Yeah. Okay. A minute for prayer. Thank you, Lord. All right. Typically, the cells that are more involved in mediating autoimmune processes will be more susceptible to the anti-metabolite effects of teriflunomide. So it's blocking the replication of rapidly replicating cells, which have to do with autoimmune disease, and so it's been shown to be beneficial. A whole bunch of studies, 7 milligrams, 14 milligram dosages, beneficial effects observed in a whole bunch of studies. I'm not going to go through the studies for you, but they've compared it even to beta 1A and various dosages. So, safety. if someone's going to get pregnant, there's some caution recommended in women of childbearing age, so I've been sort of hesitant to prescribe it in that age group, but you can, if you needed to, there's a specific using some drugs called cholestyramine and or charcoals. So you can get it out of the system in about 10 days if you had to in a rush. Okay, so what other drugs shall we talk about? We talked about fumarate. How about laquinimod? We'll leave laquinimod off. Anybody want to talk about laquinimod? You can look it up. Kind of sort of dead in the water right now is my mind. Alemtuzumab. Everyone heard of that one? Yes. Questions about? Anybody know what CD52 is? Who cares, right? It's in the lymphocytes and monocytes, which are part of the immune system. It's quite effective at achieving rapid and sustained lymphocyte depletion. People kind of like it because you only have to do it once a year for 5 days and a year later for 3 days. It really knocks out the lymph system, the immune system. Lloyd Kasper, who did some of the Dartmouth work on this, thought he had the cure. I mean, you've got huge numbers of improvement in people, 50%, 60% improved, but it really knocks out the immune system. And so he had some concerns, as I've spoken to him, about the eventual use of this medicine. It's going to find a place in the armamentarium.
What was that medication, doctor?
Alemtuzumab, ALEMTUZUMAB. MAB means monoclonal antibody. That's what they're derived from. Anyone that ends in MAB, it's the same thing. So they had a secondary outcome measure. They had 77% of the alemtuzumab treated patients remained relapse-free for 2 years. I mean, it works. MRI outcomes were really good. The annualized relapse rate was good. It's just the whole impact on the immune system that's troublesome. Daclizumab, D-A-C-L-I-Z-U-M-A-B, a humanized monoclonal antibody against the alpha chain of the high-affinity interleukin-2, the CD25. So that's another one. T cells, they're going after the T cells. And they're antagonizing, which you inhibit the activated T cells. Let's see. I think somebody in Maine actually may start using daclizumab pretty soon, but we'll see. Ocrelizumab, O-C-R-E-L-I-Z-U-M-A-B, another recombinant monoclonal antibody structurally similar to rituximab. So there's studies going on with this one, there's studies going on with rituximab. Remember I mentioned rituximab, it goes after the CD20 on the B cells. So here's something that's going after the other arm of the immune system that we need to address. A lot of randomized studies. Basically, it's in phase 2 testing, strong suppression of disease activity on MRI and relapses, 3 large phase 3 trials underway. I want to say something about the studies too. When you compare the studies that are going on now to the studies that were going on in the 90s and early 2000s, they're different. They're different populations of patients. The way we looked at MS was different. The McDonald criteria have evolved. The use of the MRIs I mentioned early on has evolved, so that it's really hard to compare apples and oranges. If you look at even the number of relapses patients are having these days in the studies compared to the relapses they were having in those days, it changes the way we have to analyze the data. The very statistical analysis that's done is different. So you have to keep that in mind. Don't try to compare the studies from the old days to the present. And that's one of the reasons the FDA is requiring some of the newer phase 3 studies to include one of the older first-line drugs as a comparison and a head-to-head as part of the trials before they get approved by the FDA. There's another one we're going to be able to do locally, which is, I don't think I've signed anything with the FDA on this one. It's called ONO 4641, ONO-4641. There's public information available on it. It's a selective agonist for the sphingosine 1-phosphate receptors, kind of like fingolimod, you've heard of it. Keeps the T cells in the lymph nodes from egressing, but without some of the cardiac side effects of the eye stuff. So it hasn't been studied. It's just about to start phase 3. Phase 2 just finished. A very efficacious drug. Phase 1 was done by, again, Lloyd Kasper up at Dartmouth and was really good at the mouse level. So that's got a lot of promise. It prevents relapses of disease in the non-obese diabetic mouse. We know that for sure. All right. So let's see. Registration studies look at highly informative and carefully selected patients. So that's different than what we see in clinical practice, isn't it? And you're only looking at 1 to 2 years. So if something's going to suppress the immune system and reduce, say, surveillance for neoplasm, you're not going to know about it in 2 years. So a lot of these studies are now being extended. For instance, teriflutamide out 5, 6, 7 years. So the initial data that you hear about too is only based on 2 years. So you have to stay up with the research that gets released about subsequent studies on the same drugs from the same patients 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years out before you really know how safe they are, and also how efficacious they are over the long time. Newer agents appeal because of convenience, i.e., everyone likes oral, duh. Or the perception that they demonstrate superior efficacy compared to the long-standing interferon beta, or Copaxone, gluteramine acetate. But few data support this. Recent studies show that annualized relapse rates for interferon beta or GA in the same range as some of the newer agents. So there's a concept that you may read about. I just want to teach you one other concept. I hate statistics. Hated it in med school, hate it now, but it's part of life because everybody's different. Just like your MS in the course of the day is different all day, and you're different than the guy sitting next to you in the chair who's got MS. You look at hundreds and hundreds of patients, everybody's different, right? So if you're going to treat people, you have to do it double-blind, you have to use good science, you have to have replication, and you have to look at what are you analyzing? You know, is this really true, or is it just sort of corporate BS and they're just trying to sell some snake oil? So the number needed to treat, NNT, number needed to treat, is a measure thought to allow for comparison of efficacy. Efficacy means does it work? Across different studies. It's no longer applicable in populations with very low risk of events. If people aren't having lots of relapses, you can't use that measure anymore. In a population with high relapse rates, a low number needed to treat is achievable and reflects efficacy. But in populations with low relapse rates, a higher number is needed to treat is seen owing to the infrequency of the attacks. So again, look at what they're measuring. It's hard to do, but spend some time reading your studies. And then read what the like editors or somebody who's commenting on them have to say. Short-term studies can't predict all the side effects that can occur over a long time. Not all patients present with the same amount of disease or carry the same risk of progression. Risk factors such as disease course, type of relapse and residual disability, MRI burden of disease, or even response to previously used modifying drugs must be taken into account before you choose your therapy. So I talked about the vitamin D. They just came out with vitamin D and multiple sclerosis in India. Again, associated, the levels totally correlated with the risk of MS in India. I've got other things I could talk about, but I'd rather take questions. So let's do that, and then we'll wrap it up and let you guys have fun. All right, in the back.
You had mentioned the trial, the ONO 4641.
Yep.
Question of that. I was in that trial, so when I went into it, it was for relapse remitting. And for whatever reasons, I got taken out of the trial. And now I'm finding out that they are now testing it for secondary progressive. But yes, I've heard from one person they're changed it to that. Another person has told me no, they never heard that. Just what have you heard, or what is your opinion of that drug?
Let me say I don't know. Refer you to the Edie Sorono rep who's in the room to get you more information about it, at Boylston, because I'm actually going to be the principal investigator for that locally, and I don't want to introduce bias even by saying something about it. I'm sorry that you didn't have a good result with it. I don't know that much about it even to answer you like what happened with you and whether they've changed what they're going to use it for. I think this is going to be relapsing remitting as it opens up, but I don't know for sure, and maybe you can find out from the rep. Yeah, I don't know. I'm involved in another one which is for early Alzheimer's disease, and that's just about to get launched, so I've had all my energies focused on that. So this one is sort of like just on the back burner for me. I don't want to say something stupid. Thanks. Yeah. And that's easy for me to do. Yeah.
I've seen a program on Nova the other day that they're actually targeting DNA right now. They're doing it more for flu vaccinations. And I'm wondering if, by doing this, if they can actually, they're looking at repairing myelin. I'm just wondering where they're going to be concentrating more on therapies or actual repairing of myelin?
Did everyone hear the question? I think there's like 800 studies going on right now. There's so many, and I think they're doing both. I think it's spread out really nicely across the spectrum of possibilities. And you know, now I'm engaged in more of these studies on a sophisticated level. Really respect these results because they really put a lot of effort and energy into making sure that the data is good and that it's not just junk that's being published. They're hard to do studies, it's expensive to do good studies, you need big numbers, especially with a disease as heterogeneous as MS or Alzheimer's or whatever it is. So they're doing a lot of studies in all of the areas you just mentioned. And when you see the results, respect them because there's not a lot of junk being done. It's really pretty, I respect it much more, having now been involved in it. Yes?
I do not have MS, but I do take vitamin D. Is it better to take a vitamin D standalone? I have found a fish oil that says it has 2,000 vitamin D in it. Is that okay to take?
Yeah, the question is, can you take vitamin D and fish oil together, or do you need to take it separately? Yeah, it's fine to take it as one pill. In fact, I didn't mention it, but there is some recent data that fish oil, too, is beneficial in some patients with MS. So I could justify adding that to your armamentarium. But it's okay to take fish oil and vitamin D together, yes.
I have a question.
Yeah, it is.
The new drug that's coming out, the one that you take once a year, the infusion, that you do
Yep.
try, I can't remember the name of it, the one that begins with an L, but do you know if that is nearing the end of being approved, or?
Yes, I think it actually was just approved, and it's going to. It will have use, and it will be available in Maine. I'm just not sure where it's going to fit in my choices for patients, given what Lloyd told me about what happens to the immune system. You can't reverse it. You knock out the immune system, and it's shot. That second year, it's gone. And for me, anything that's that permanent, I'm like, just we'll see. You know, I'm not. So, but it will be available. Yeah.
Well, I've been talking to my neurologist about it.
Sure.
She feels that I'm a good candidate
Yep.
for it.
Yep.
But she thought it was going to be out by December, and now she tells me now it's not quite. I just wondered if...
I think it's real soon. What's the rollout? Do you know? January. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not dissing it. I think it's definitely going to have a role, and it may be perfect for you. I'm just a little bit wary just because of what Lloyd said. And maybe what we could do is get Lloyd down here sometime to talk about it at one of these meetings, because he had personal experience, you know, administering to a lot of folks. And he doesn't diss it. He just, you know, he's aware of it. That's all.
Right.
And he called me once when it first started. He said, "I got the cure." He says, "I got the cure. This stuff is the cure." He really did on the phone. He's like so excited. This is it. It works. It's just, you know, what about 5 years from now when you get exposed to, you know, some. And by the way, in the latest studies with that, they gave acyclovir to the second set of patients who were getting the study drug, just routinely, kind of unblinded. I think if you're the one getting acyclovir, you kind of knew you were getting the drug too. But that's to prevent a secondary herpetic, you know, like a trigeminal neuralgia and that kind of thing happening. So if you do go on it, I'm sure your neurologist will know all about it, but I would make almost prophylax with an antiviral too. Yes. Yes.
Dr. Ross, is there anything in the pipeline for people who have, were diagnosed with primary progressive?
Yeah, there actually are studies. There's nothing that I've seen that's been efficacious, but there are studies out there of a number of agents for primary progressive. But I don't know. I haven't seen data that says, oh, this is going to be the one. So stay tuned. But there are studies. Yes, follow-up question.
I was going to ask you about the nutrition work of Dr. Terry Walls from the University of Iowa. That you're familiar with her. She's a physician who was diagnosed with MS herself and has devoted a lot of study to nutrition. And she has come up with a modified paleo diet that she claims got her from a wheelchair to being able to make her rounds of VA clinic at the University of Iowa. Are you familiar with it?
I should be, because I did my fellowship at the University of Iowa, and it hasn't hit their like alumni magazine yet. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Well, she does have a website, and her name is Terry, T-E-R-R-Y, Walls, W-A-H-L-S, .com. And, you know, you can read about her modified paleo diet. She eliminates dairy from her diet, and grains, and a number of other things. And
Has everyone heard of the paleo diet before? Yeah, I actually did it for a little. I lost a ton of weight on it, but you're not quite right. It's a lot of meat. You're very cave person-esque. I'm not sure it would be the best thing for MS. Maybe that plus some supplements, because you're losing a lot of essential vitamins that you need for the nerves to regenerate and to grow back. So you probably have to do some vitamin and real good nutritional vegetable supplementation. Make sure you're doing it right. But I can sort of see it. I have one patient doing it, definitely doing better. I'll agree with that. The MS is better. But she and her husband are really conscientious about all of the stuff that goes into it. I think the reason it helps, and this is now no longer clinically based medicine, this is Dr. Ross's sort of, standing on a soapbox. A lot of MS is lifestyle, in the sense that we are exposed to a tremendous number of exogenous things in our diet and our environment which are harmful to our immune system. And one of the things Lloyd Casper is working on at Dartmouth is what is the effect of that stuff on the gut microbiome. Now, the gut microbiome means that you have bacteria in your colon. And this is getting to be a hot subject, and if you Google it, you're going to find thousands of articles now. We started talking about it a couple of years ago. A lot of people know that I've talked about probiotics. There's nothing proven in human subjects yet, human people, human patients, whatever you call it. But in mice, if you fix the gut microbiome, you change the ratio of one species to another. There are some which appear to be friendly in the sense that they are secreting something which is good for MS. And in fact, it's synergistic with vitamin D, I bet. Some of these buggies do well with a higher vitamin D level, and then your immune system's even more balanced. There may be something about the paleo diet that you're actually avoiding the bad stuff. Like if they've given the cows, injections of females' hormones to make them get more milk, or they've given them antibiotics, and then you consume those products, your body has to process it. If you're not processing that bad stuff anymore, maybe it allows your own immune system, which is emerging from Peyer's patches in the colon and going up to the lymph nodes, to equilibrate in a more balanced way. But anyway, with EAE, the experimental allergic encephalomyelitis that you give to mice, if they pre-treated them with probiotics, they didn't get the MS-like disease, and in fact, if they had it and you gave them the probiotics, they got better. So there will be some studies in humans. In fact, Howard Weiner, there was somebody here who said they were a patient, in fact, in the introduction lady. Howard Weiner was biopsying and doing colon samples to see what the bacteria are in MS patients. So there's a lot of data going to come out on that too. So there may be something to the paleo diet. I don't want to diss it, but in and of itself, it could be potentially unhealthy to an MS patient. So I just want to balance. Okay, thank you. Oh, another question. I'm not going to let me go.
While you're still on the diet, what's your take on the vegan diet?
Vegan, again, I think when people start becoming conscious of what they're putting in their body, less MSG, less genetically modified corn, less wheat that's coming out, our body isn't processing well. You're going to help this system, because remember, the immune system is actually starting in the gut. That's where you have a gut feeling. It's the gut where everything is starting. So if we can get balance down there, we may be able to balance what's going on all the way up here in the brain. But that's almost science fiction right now. It's really cutting edge. Yes, and it's different than pharma. It's completely different. When you're taking one of these drugs, you've already got MS. So you can use these naturopathic or holistic ways of approaching it, but Don't forget, this is a bad disease. You want to be aggressive. You want to hit it early when the relapses are bad with something that is efficacious in a sharp way against the immune system. You don't want to end up with those transected plaques and all those neurons dying out, because once you're disabled, it just continues inexorably. You're behind the 8 ball. So I know it's kind of easy to have that denial thing that she was talking about, but let's do both until we've actually figured out what's causing MS in a very specific way. Okay, let me out of here, you guys. No, you want a joke?
Yes.
Go ahead. Hey, wait, everyone's. All right, go ahead, give me a thing and I'll tell the joke.
Any new news about low-dose naltrexone? Anything positive or negative?
Yeah, I've got three or four patients on it, and they do just fine. They're not progressing. So I don't know, but that's just anecdotal. There's a few reports in like the neurology continuum where some people have looked at it and they don't say bad things about it, but there's not enough numbers to really say it works either. So I would just put it as alternative therapy. So here's the joke, because everyone's heard like so many of my jokes, and actually they were being discussed. So this guy goes to jail, and he's in the cell his first night with this old timer, and he hears somebody yell out, 14! And the whole cell block, everybody laughs. And then a few minutes later, somebody yells out, 68! Everyone laughs. A few minutes later, somebody yells out, 16! Everyone laughs. So the newbie says to the old guy, what's up with these numbers and people laughing? And the old guy says, well, we've been in jail for so long, we know each other's jokes. So we just numbered them. And so you just call out the number, and then people know what the joke is, so they remember and they laugh. So he says, you try it. So the newbie goes, 15! Nobody laughs. He looks at the old guy goes, some people just can't tell a joke.
That's too much.